Hello students, I am Anup Kumar Kapoor from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today I am going to speak on the module Demonstration of Field Methods in Biological Anthropology from the paper Research Methods and Fieldwork. The learning outcomes of the modules are: first, to understand about the basic concept of fieldwork and fieldwork tradition in anthropology. Second, to learn the basic idea of fieldwork in physical or biological anthropology. And third one, to elucidate the information related to division of anthropometry and the different anthropometric instruments in physical or biological anthropology. First of all, we will introduce briefly on fieldwork and fieldwork tradition in anthropology. Fieldwork, more than anything else, characterizes the discipline of anthropology. It advocates face-to-face experience with its subjects. One of the anthropologists in 1983 puts it brilliantly by stating that there is, due to anthropologists' desire to receive phenomenon thoughts, his own senses, because of his great love of facts. The concept of fieldwork in anthropology is different from the other social sciences. Anthropology would not be what it is today but for the insights fed into it by intensive fieldwork. It was not, however, always so. Fieldwork was not what interested our founding fathers. Anthropology, in its early stages, was mainly concerned with the study of primitive society. In the absence of any scientifically collected data by professionals, the image of primitive man was determined by description of such narrators as travelers and hunters. Hence, there seems to have been a pendulum swing from extreme in speculation about primitive man. First, he was a little more than an animal who lived in poverty, violence, and fear. Then he was a gentle person who lived in plenty, peace, and security. First he was lawless, then he was a slave to law and custom. First he was devoid of any religious feelings or beliefs, and then he was entirely dominated by the sacred and immersed in ritual. First he was an individualist who preyed on the weaker and held what he could. Then he was communist who held lands and goods in common. First he was sexually promiscuous. Then he was a model of domestic virtue. First he was lethargic and incorrigibly lazy. Then he was alert and industrious, as given by Evans Pochard in 1956. There were all sorts of distortions and contradictions. Subjectivity was sometimes stretched to absurdity and fantasy. Among the pioneer field researchers, the man who did more than most others in defining the nature of fieldwork was Rivers. He distinguished between intensive and survey work. Intensive empirical studies form the core of anthropological studies today. Rivers had himself engaged in both types of research: survey work in Melanesia and intensive fieldwork among the Todas tribes in India. However, the early empirical research suffered from some weaknesses. The short-time researchers spent among the people they studied, their ignorance of the subject's language and their casual approach did not permit deep investigation. Radcliffe Brown, a student of Rivers and Haddon, provided an important thrust to the anthropological fieldwork. His fieldwork among the Andaman Islanders in India between 1906 to 1908 is considered to be the first genuinely intensive fieldwork in a primitive society to describe the social life of a people in such a way as to bring out clearly what was significant in it for theorists. He lived among the Andaman Islanders intimately, learned their language, and collected the data through participant observation. Malevsky, the great British anthropologist of Polish origin, transformed the fieldwork in anthropology to such an extent that things could never be the same again. As Serna in 83 correctly remarks, with the publication of the Malevsky, Argonauts of the Western Pacific amateur ethnography was totally eclipsed. The ethnography field became a highly professionalized activity. It was no more data collection. It turned into deeper analysis of particular social structure and culture patterns. He was thorough field worker. He not only spent a longer period of time than any anthropologist before or after him in a single study of a primitive people, but he was also the first anthropologist to conduct his whole research through the native language. It is he who proclaimed what may be called the philosophy of fieldwork, and there is little that has been added to the principles of fieldwork given by Malevsky half a century ago. We certainly use more technical aids today, increasingly rely upon statistical tools, but the essential definition of the nature of fieldwork remains substantially the same as. The essential requirements and conditions of a good field work described in the preceding paragraph by another great field researcher, that is Evans Pritchard, may be covered within the parameters of two terms: intensive fieldwork and participant observation, so distinctive of anthropological studies. Unfortunately, very few people have published their field experiences. This implication of the general neglect would seem to be that what matter are the results of fieldwork rather than the techniques that one might employ for data collection, so long as certain basic requirements of objective investigation have been met. This is a pity because the importance of self-analysis by the investigator becomes very valuable for himself and for others in the absence of standardization of fieldwork techniques. One way to meet this situation is try to standardize research techniques and to prepare formal guides to fieldwork. The argument is simple: anthropology as a biosocial science can hardly afford to be personal adventure. It has to be collective endeavor, united by shared understandings in respect of both purpose and methodology. Methods of biosocial research should be communicated to students in the classroom and replicable in the field. Now let us discuss about the fieldwork in physical or biological anthropology. Whatever has been described in the preceding pages mainly concerned with fieldwork in biosocial anthropology, and of course most of the anthropological field research is concerned with this branch of anthropology. However, research in physical or biological anthropology also requires fulfillment of some of the conditions laid down for social or cultural anthropology. Earlier, physical anthropology research was mainly confined to the study of morphological criteria for racial classification. Biological anthropologists study biological and physical features of cultures and societies by spending time observing, interacting, and taking anthropometric measurements with the members of those cultures, taking notes. Here, I will like to tell you certain points that it is up to the concerned anthropologist how he perceives the concept of fieldwork, how he thinks, how to carry out the fieldwork. It depends on the basis of his experience. What I want to say is, in case you go for 15 days first phase of fieldwork, you will have a different experience. When you go for a 1 month or 2 months fieldwork experience, in second phase you will have a different experience. When you will go for more than 3 months or 4 months, you will have a different experience. Means here face-to-face interaction. That is very important for the student of anthropology. And what I see that you have to spend time, maximum time among the people in one particular habitat, in a village, so that you can have all the information from the family, from the village, or whatever the group you are going to study. Now, historically, biological anthropologists relied on observation and second-hand accounts, then extrapolated conclusions, often incorrect, based on lack of first-hand experience. Over time, biological anthropologists began to abandon armchair anthropology in favor of physical study in the field, collecting their own information. Biological anthropologists conducted fieldwork using their own senses and tools to document experiences and research with other societies. The present-day physical anthropology involves extensive research in dental anthropology, population genetics, cytogenetics, molecular and biochemical genetics, and host of other specializations like demography. Some of these fields require detailed knowledge of the environment and kinship system of the human groups under study. All this required at least some of the methodological fineness and vigor demonstrated by biosocial anthropology. The physical anthropologists too are required to establish rapport with their subjects and respondents, and sometimes have to resort to participant observation technique to elicit required data. Fieldwork has been accepted as an indispensable rite of passage in the making of a modern anthropologist, sometimes referred to as a nectar or a feat of living with strangers. The anthropological approach is, to Sue Klung's term, is that of attached detachment. Fieldwork is considered, in Kroeber's words, an opportunity, a privilege, and the professional catcher. Levi-Strauss has the last word when he says that indeed the field research with which every anthropological career begins is the mother and wet nurse of doubt, the philosophical attitude par excellence. This anthropological doubt doesn't only consist of knowing that one knows nothing, but of resolutely exposing what one thought one knew, and indeed one's very own ignorance to the bufferings, and indeed one's very own ignorance to most cherished ideas and habits by them to the highest degree. Let us discuss about history of science of anthropometry. When White in 1974 bases his assertion upon the observation of both skeletons and living men, made the statement that the forearm of Negroes in proportion to the upper arm was longer than in white men, he inaugurated the science of comparative racial anthropometry and showed that there were constant differences in the bodily proportions of the various human races. Difference of this sort seems to have been unrecognized before this, even by artists and sculptors, who, although from the time of Egyptian and Assyrian carvings had elaborated and even emphasized the racial characters of face and hand, had given no heed to differences in the other parts of the body. It is that quite possible that the classic sculptors of Greece and Rome may have used indifferently as models their own people and their foreign slaves, which may serve to verify and explain the asserted negroid proportion of the Apollo Belvedere. The assertion of white was an advance upon new ground, and although it was accompanied by neither detailed measurements, calculation of averages, or indices, it was yet of great value in the development of the subject. After this, however, the work roasted for 44 years, when Humphrey in 1838 made careful measurements not only of humerus and radius, but of femur and tibia also, in 25 skeletons of Negroes and the same number of those of white men. White regarding the long forearm, that is radius of Negroes, and found a similar greater length in the lower leg, that is the tibia of the same race, as compared with the whites. But by this time, other anthropologists had become interested in racial differences in bodily proportion, and under the critical scrutiny of Broca, this subject received still more careful treatment. He pointed out that fact that a total height obtained from the articulated skeleton depended too much upon the preparatory who put the bones together, and hence disregarded these uncertain measurements in favor of one involving the length of a single long bone or of two combined. He thus substituted for Humphrey's standard now the length of the femur, then the radius, and again the combined length of the humerus and radius, or femur and tibia, with each of which in turn with a value of 100, the length of the other long arm and leg bones was compared. This line of work, the anthropometry of the living subjects, developed naturally in the field as osteometry had developed in the museum, and was direct result of the series of great scientific voyages like those of the Novars and the Challenger, characteristics of the last third of the 19th century. Naturally, in the development of physical anthropology or ethnology, the facial features had long received much attention and had become the subject of careful measurements, with averages and indices, and the extension of this work to the rest of the body naturally followed. Thus, by the opening of the new century, anthropometry had already become an important branch of anthropology, expressed in extensive and rapidly increasing literature. Individual investigators, however, differed widely, not only in the measurements employed in their relative values, but in the manner in which these measurements were taken and the instrument used, so that there could be little or no trustworthy comparison between the results of different investigations. The science was thus ready for its next phase of development, the standardizing of the measurements. This was first attempted in the case of the skull, as craniometry had received the most attention, and its measurements were thus the most in the need of standardizing, and came as the result of the International Congress on Anthropologists meeting in Monaco during April 1906. The proposal for this came from the Committee of the Congress, MMMP, Papillon, and Vernieu, and the work was done by special committee appointed for the purpose. M.F. Glufrida Rugri et al. The proposals presented by the committee were ratified by the Congress and have thus become the set of standard skull measurements to be followed so far as possible by anthropometrists everywhere. A second standardization, that of measurements of the living body, excluding the head, resulted in much the same way from proposals at the International Congress of 1912, which met in Geneva, Switzerland, in September of that year. There were 49 separate measurements proposed by the committee, and these were, as in the previous case, enormously devoted by the Congress. The anthropometry of the bones of the skeleton, aside from the skull, has not as yet become subject of international agreement, and is thus still in the stage of craniometry just previous to 1906. That is, detailed measurements have been worked out for the separate bones by different investigators, but the work needs yet to be standardized, and those measurements selected which are generally considered essentially. We accept the pioneer work of Turner, who published his work on the skeletons collected by the Challenger expedition in 1886. The detailed asymmetry of the separate bones has been the work of the 20th century. The modern treatment of the vertical column, a difficult problem for the osteometrist, was delayed until 1912 when it received competent treatment by Hasibe. The skeleton of hand and foot may be treated as a whole, or certain significant bones, especially those of carpus and tarsus, may be considered by themselves. Thus, for the foot skeleton as a whole, there is the paper of Volkovo in 1905 and that of M. and Mimi Adachi of the same year, while for separate foot bones those of Siever on the talus, of Manners Smith on cubit and Ravicular's bone. And a researcher on the calculus in 1913 may serve as an example. It may thus to be said that at the outbreak of the European War in 1914, the field of osteometry had just been covered as for the first blocking out of essential measurements for the separate bones. But that no attempt has been made to establish a general agreement or to secure the university in usage still, less there been a sufficient number of studies based upon the bones of the separate human races to form the basis of much comparison. It is at this point that we may trust the work will be resumed at the expiration of the Great War. The employment of angular measurements, now an important part of anthropometry, especially in the case of bones, has had a course of development closely similar to that of linear measurements and above reviewed. The first angle employed was the famous facial angle of Petrus Camper, described in a posthumous work of this author bearing the date 1780. On the other hand, the apes, monkeys, and lower mammals gave angles less than 70 degrees in a decreasing series, so that this facial angle was roughly a measure of the height of the forehead and hence indicating of the general intelligence. As with the linear measurements, the mid-19th century, largely under the leadership of Paul Broca, brought into use other angles, for the most part those of the skull, while at the present times important angular measurements have been established for many other bones. Concerning the actual value of anthropometric measurements of whatever sort and the extent to which measurements may be profitably carried, both opinion and practice differ widely. As in other forms of biometrics, where mathematics plays an important part in the investigation of a primarily biological problem, certain investigators are bound to be more interested in the mathematical than in the biological side, and there is always danger that in their hands the latter cause may suffer and the work be viewed as a mathematical problem in which the goal is reached when the new relations involved are expressed in the form of formulae and tables. A real danger that besets the anthropometrist along the mathematical side, and one to which a student may be naturally brought by seeking to be accurate, is the temptation to treat with too great respect the actual figures obtained from the individual measurements, to regard the decimal place as of equal importance in all the cases, and to feel that a series of measurements carried out to the third place, for instance, is much more accurate and reliable than one carried out only on a single place beyond the part. As a matter of fact, the accuracy of a result depends essentially upon the method of taking the measurement, and here not only must be personal equation as involved in the operator be taken into consideration, but also the condition of the material measured, for where the decimal places used go beyond the error of two consecutive measurements, there is absolutely no value in carrying them out. If, as an illustration, we find that in the certain skull measurement, the results obtained by different operators or by the same operator at different times do not agree with each other to within 0.5 millimeters, it is simply time lost to attempt to carry out the individual measurements beyond one decimal place, especially in the case of measurements of the living, where the operator has to consider not only his own degree of accuracy, but also the slight involuntary changes of position of the subject. There are certain of the longer measurements where one cannot hope to be accurate within a whole centimeter, and where attention to differences of 2 to 3 millimeters would be of no possible avail. What are the aims and demonstration of field methods in biological anthropology? That is very important when we deal with the biological anthropology. The aim of the demonstration of field methods in biological anthropology is to provide, in a form suitable for use in the field, instruction on the whole range of methods required for the fulfillment of human biological studies on a comparative basis. Certain of these methods can be used to carry out the rapid surveys on growth, physique, and genetic constitution. They are also appropriate for the pursuit of intensive multidisciplinary investigation. Finally, procedures are laid down whereby the requisite background information about the group, sample, subject under study may be obtained. These concern in particular the full identification of the group, sample, and subject, medical and nutrient status, socio-demographic characteristics, and analysis of habitual activity pattern, and a description of the environment. When we take the arrangement of sections, demonstration of field method in biological anthropology can be arranged in the following section. First is an introduction, which includes a brief general description and rationale of the procedure, a list of observations to be made, and most important, a note on desirable sample size and composition. Second is technique. This part includes detailed instruction for carrying out any test required relative to the observation to be made. Next is the data collecting sheet. This is as form to be filled in for each individual studied, giving minimum personal details and all the essential data obtained by means of procedures. These forms are also to be used as a primary data collecting sheets in the field. The great majority of the data sheet, however, is presented in a form suitable for recording in the field, but for computer use transfer and encoding the data would be necessary, which is very important in present day scenario. The next is need for training. Trained personnel are required to carry out these all measurements. The methods, even where these are described in great detail, demand a thorough acquaintance with their underlying principle as well as the technical details and use of instruments. Even the simple techniques such as those of anthropometry and anthroposcopy cannot give reliable results unless observer has practiced the methods of thoroughly and has an appreciation of the inherent errors and limitation of the techniques. Facilities for training in all the requisite techniques certainly exist, although it is appreciated that to take advantage of these may in some cases, be difficult on financial grounds. Next comes fieldwork approach to the local population. The detailed formulation for research and its execution is naturally the responsibility of the team concerned, and they will undertake the necessary discussion with those countries whose cooperation in a particular region is desirable. Wherever possible, a preliminary visit should be planned so that proper arrangements can be made with the authorities concerned for administrative, custom, etc., and a full explanation of the aims and conduct of the local authorities concerned. Their full cooperation must in all cases be ensured. In this connection, research team in the field will be under special obligation to maintain a high ethical approach to the local population. Permission to test subject on the field should be sought not only from individuals and administrative leaders but also from community and tribal leaders. Next comes the specification for the individual and the group description of the population group and sample selected. For each technique related to data collection during biological anthropological fieldwork, sufficient information is to be recorded to make possible the clear identification of both the subject of the examination. The following suggestions may be considered. For example, marking the subject, taking photographs, taking fingerprints, distinguishing features, some other characteristics. The second is age ascertainment, where the chronological age is known. This method will be recorded as a decimal age. Many persons living in the developing regions of the tropics, however, are ignorant of their exact age, or occasionally many employ a system of age classification different from the Western method. The reason for this is that the precise age may have little significance unless it has been recognized social value, for example, in relation to legal responsibility, admission to school permanent rights, etc. Among some people, functional or physiological age groups are recognized, for example, a big enough to be able to hear ghosts or for capable of carrying a younger sibling or marriageable. For adults, all that have been possible to is to consider the two sexes in a broad age groups, young adults, adults, and older adults. However, differentiation may sometimes be difficult in groups where the scalp hair is shaped, where there is no middle age obesity, and where facial wrinkles are less prominent against a darker complexion, or conversely, where women age rapidly with continuous childbearing and too much work. A long-term local calendar of important events may have to be constructed based on events in the preceding years, including agriculture, climatic, and political occurrences, as well as natural or man-made disasters. More exact age assessment is desirable in the anthropometry of young children. When dealing with infants and preschool children, ages should, if possible, be known to the nearest month. For school children, assessment of ages to the nearest 3 months should be attempted in field survey. Circumstances age assessment in young children may be attempted in various ways. Documentary evidences may, though rarely be forthcoming, including birth certificates, horoscopes, and baptism certificates. Careful must be encouraged to bring these vital papers at the time of examination. Next is selection of sample size. For a single population, following points must kept in mind while selecting the sample size. That is, sampling should be simple, random, without replacement. Second is the population sampled should be infinitely large, and the sample size in each instance should be to provide a confidence interval of half range the probability with 0.05. Two cases are mostly considered, mainly the estimation of a proportion and the estimation of the means of normality distributed variable. For comparison of the two populations, the standard procedure for deciding the appropriate sample size to obtain a given clearance or to given a chance or discrimination between the means of two normal populations is set to out in Biometrica, that is table for statistician Cavendish Plus published in 1954, where the comparison is between two proportions for the two populations. The procedure to be followed is described in the most statistical books. Anthropometric instruments, the instruments employed in anthropometry may be grouped according to form and use as follows: instruments for measurement, linear measurements, you have to use calipers, craniophore, craniometer, pelvimeter, slide compass, anthropometer, rod compass, osmometric board, for guards and arches, tape measurements, angles, goniometer for attachment, special types for goniometer, torsion angle, that is the shaft of lung and bones. Pallograph, volumetric instruments, scales for recording weight, then comes instruments for holding and orienting skulls and other bones. Simple types of craniophore, cubic craniophore of Martin, osteophores, combined craniophores and osteophores of Hetzel, instruments for drawing and delineating deptograph or Lucas, perigraph or Lesion, diagraph of Martin, stereograph of Broca. Let us summarize what we have learned in this module. Fieldwork characterizes the discipline of anthropology. It advocates face-to-face experience with the subjects. Anthropology in its early stage was mainly concerned with the study of primitive society, but now it is concerned with the different fields like development, health, nutrition, lifestyle, culture, and beliefs, and not leaving behind the conventional areas of research. Seligman remarked that fieldwork was to anthropology what the blood of the martyrs was to church. Indeed, proved prophetic. From this time onward, anthropology became a whole-time professional study, and field experience is an essential part of anthropological study. The use of more technical aids today increasingly rely upon statistical tools, but the essential definition of the nature of fieldwork remains substantially the same as Walensky's description. It is necessary for anthropologists to spend sufficient time on the study. He must throughout be in close contact with the people among whom he is working, and he must communicate with them solely through their own language, and he must study their entire culture and social life. The essential requirement and conditions of a good fieldwork may be covered within the parameters of two terms: intensive fieldwork and participant observation. So, distinguished anthropological studies, methods of biosocial research should be communicable to students in the classroom and replicable in the field. Physical anthropology research was mainly confined to the study of morphological criteria for racial classification. Finally, I would like to say that nowadays there is a change in the perspective of anthropology. As we have discussed, the fieldwork started from the prehistoric or from the primitive society. Now in 21st century, field work is carrying out in different parts, different global level, in different institutes. Nowadays, corporate sectors have come, industries has come, different things are coming up where the student anthropology is carrying out the field work. In the case of corporate sectors, in the case of even people have chosen, the students of anthropology have chosen different temples to carry out the work. So at the time, it is up to the student. He or she has to think on which topic he or she wants to do the research, and then accordingly he has to make the plans for the fieldwork. And in my personal view is that whenever you make a plan, it should be minimum, it should be a 1 year program for fieldwork, so that you will have the data, all the information in all the seasons in a particular area, get the information in case you are a good field worker. Nowadays, it has been observed that people go there for a few days and then come back. This is not the way. The maximum time you spend in the field, maximum data I will get from the field. Thank you.